And this is just one way I could tell the story, right? I'm a fiction writer, I'm a poet, and if you're a fiction writer, if you're a poet, if you are an honest biographer or an honest autobiographer, you know any story can be told any number of ways with any number of emphases to show what it is you want to show. That doesn't mean you're lying. It just is the reality of how things actually work. Right? And so, yes, this channel has come, I would say, full circle, because it's a circle, a sort of circular journey that I've been on, a bit of the spiral upward, I would say now. And so the spiritual has come back around for me. After pretty much a decade of getting away from it in what I found to be a healthy way. And so the question of spirituality is a big question. And again, I can't cover it all here. But a big emphasis of this channel is that spirit is about meaning. And we've had this dichotomy tried to be forced upon us, that the material and the spiritual can't coexist. There's just one or the other. And the spiritual tends to be, talked about as idealism. It's all in your head. It's all in, some crazy part in you that isn't rational, and only the material is rational. And this is all frankly BS. Because again, the most objective scientist out there has started from a subjective place where they have had to decide for themselves what they think things mean, where they have had to decide what their assumptions are about what is true, where they have had to build their knowledge upon those assumptions, and where they can be or can decide not to be open and willing about their assumptions and re-examining those assumptions. See, we all have this. It's just part of what this life is. We all decide what we think things mean. One way to think of a human being is a meaning-making little machine. A little biological machine. A little critter that runs around, does things, and where other little critters are running around also and spend most of their time just surviving, the human critter has developed to have extra time and space and awareness to think about what does it mean, and to decide what it means, and to then let that feed back into life itself. That's spirituality, but it's not an ungrounded thing. At least in my opinion, it should not be an ungrounded thing. It should be heavily based in the material. Okay? Now, how did I get to this? Well, frankly, from an extremely spiritual upbringing that took place in the context of the very independent-minded, fundamentalist Christian church. And when I say that, I immediately must say that they're pretty much all their own little thing. It's all these little churches. And honestly, I don't know how many of them really exist anymore, what it's like, because I'm not in that world really anymore. But growing up, even if it was the Baptist church or the Methodist church, they had a very strong independent streak to them. And I'm going to use that term fundamentalist and not have time to describe it, what I mean really, but folks who've been around this know what that is. It is a very particular way of looking at Christianity through a lens of saying, the text of the Bible is the only thing that tells us anything, and yada yada, And there's a whole lot to unpack there, and again, a whole lot of assumptions there, just like scientists have, of this is true and what I believe and what I take to be true. And, we can use different words for these and we can cloak it in objectivity. It's all extremely subjective. That's what I come out of. Experienced a lot of repression there. A very repressed inner being, I would say, of myself. I learned to self-repress, as I'm sure many others could say. And I've taken most of my adult life trying to heal that. And so I come out of then Christianity. I spent time moving from that fundamentalist, it's a world that doesn't think of itself so much as Protestant, but that's where it came out of. It's an extreme Protestantism, right? It's like the end point of Protestantism, the point where it gets chiseled down to a pencil point, and it keeps chiseling until the point of the pencil breaks off, and then it decides to just keep chiseling rather than to realize that, maybe if we just keep, chiseling this pencil, it's eventually we won't have a pencil left. It's kind of like that. It's ultimately kind of self-destructive. But for me, an exit out of that was Catholicism. Was to go into, okay, what's the history of the church more broadly? Which, in the world I grew up in, a Catholic was going to hell, because Catholics are evil. To people outside of Christianity, or to people from different places in Christianity, that probably seems crazy, and it is. That's what I come out of. And at this point, I'm a lapsed Catholic, so wasn't a good fundamentalist Christian. Turned out to be not a very good Catholic. But I learned things from all of that. And, at the same time as I branched into Catholicism personally, started to learn a lot of other things about other religious and spiritual perspectives. Hinduism has been extremely important for me. Buddhism has been extremely important to me. My copy of Joseph Campbell's A Hero with a Thousand Faces is just right behind me, basically. Star Wars is an important thing for me. So is Dune. Dune's a big thing right now. So there's a lot more there, and a lot more that I've come out of than just that Christianity. Another wrinkle here, another thread, I guess I should say, for me has been writing. And for me has been, again, particular types of storytelling. I should add to what I've already mentioned, writers like J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and others. I'm not anymore a huge C.S. Lewis fan, but there's something there. There's a lot there, and as a close friend of J.R.R. Tolkien, who I am very, has been important to me in terms of perspective on the world, in terms of mythology, in terms of storytelling, that I can't fully unpack here. But at a fairly early age, that led me into writing my own works, into poetry. Poetry became a haven for me of, expressing myself, very much in the romantic tradition early on. And maybe that's still what I am at heart in terms of poetry. To the extent that, I went to grad school for poetry after, writing fiction, writing poetry, developing some of these skills during my time actually at the University of Notre Dame, so go to good Catholic school, where I was at that time, learning to be a Catholic, learning what that meant, learning what learning what it would mean for me, a lot happened during that time, and a lot of changes in me. It's a particular mode of writing poetry that, well, to keep this brief, I now understand as channeling, as pulling in energy that's somehow outside of myself, or at least what I normally recognize as myself, as my identity, as Jared Randall, in air quotes, right? To the point where, I was writing things that I could not explain where that came from. I could not explain how it all fit together, except that it just did. I couldn't explain certain figures coming into the work. I ended up writing a book of poetry at that time that is ostensibly all about hobos, and was based in personal family history of my grandfathers having not necessarily lived that life long term, but having ridden the rails, at least great grandfathers. And a lot of folks have that, in their history. If you're, if you've been in the United States, back since at least sometime in the 1800s, obviously when trains first came around, a lot of people lived that life. A lot of us have migrant work in our history. A lot of us had family members who survived that way, who followed the harvests out west and then came back, especially this post-Civil War, right? When the whole agriculture industry was getting mechanized, but there was still this whole sort of migration that would happen every year, because when you needed your crop harvest and you had a huge field, you needed a lot of people to do that, and it had to be done now. And you could follow that wave out as the harvest went out west, and then you could bring the money that you made back home and help pay the bills at home. And that was your money pot for the next year, perhaps. This is a life a lot of people lived. It was not a rare thing. A lot of white people lived this life. A lot of white people who would now turn their noses up at migrants, at people who travel to where the work is. How dare they? So you can see some of my commitments there, and if that turns you off, well, you don't have to listen. Actually, a professor of mine encapsulated what that book is, the book that I wrote. It's called Apocryphal Road Code, and in it, what my professor friend sort of realized out loud is that there's a figure that comes out and speaks in it that he called a transcendental hobo, and that is the best way to mention it. It is a spiritual figure. And again, it was a voice that started talking that I started to channel that was not exactly me. And it spoke of a time coming that we have been in, gone through, and are sort of rattling around the bottom of the barrel with. A time of the return of the hobos. Not so much in the sense of actual hobos, but in the sense of there's the person who became a true hobo and stayed out on the road. That was a different type of thing. It was a life of freedom, perhaps, a life of commitment, maybe running away from commitment just as much as embracing the freedom of that. People out on the road did find that they needed to take care of each other. They did need to help each other. And if someone was among them that was making things rough on everyone else, Well, that made it rough on everyone else, and that wasn't allowed. So even in this freewheeling group, riding the rails to and fro, escaping the cold months in the warm places, and maybe going back home or around home in the warm months, these types of things. And then finding a little bit of work here and there, and just doing enough to get by, right? Not drinking the Kool-Aid of what you're supposed to do, right? Of having the home and the factory job and the all that comes with that. Choosing a freer life instead, a sense of a time of neediness, a sense of a time of poverty. And it's not just money poverty, right? It's a poverty of being able to choose our own lives, a poverty of like there's no space for that, there's no money for that, there's no time for that, right? You have to run around in the rat race. So that's a lot of the work that what I'm doing now that comes out of that space, out of that sense of what was coming. And this I wrote this book basically right before and then kind of during, but it was already started. The course of it was already going when the financial crash happened, and I was sort of an early, hesitate to use the word victim, but an early experiencer of the housing crash. We're talking back 2007, 2008, 2009. That we still have not recovered from in this country, in the United States. That is still affecting people's lives. And then I entered the ranks of those who now have too many student loans to be able to buy a house because no one will lend to you because you have student loans. And all the things that you were promised that you did the right way and you worked so hard to do, you can get to a point where none of it is actually working, and it seems like you're invisible. It seems like no one cares. And this is the world that I envisioned and channeled back during that time, and we're squarely in it. And it can't last only just so long. Something has to give. It's been propped up. And we're now experiencing the bottom of the barrel of that from my perspective. So again, what is spirituality? Well, there's a sort of new age spirituality that it may seem like I am very much in tune with, and maybe in some ways I am, but I don't call myself a new ager. I don't think of myself that way, because a lot of that world is stuck in a denial of the material realities of the bulk of people. And there's a lot of selling going on of positive thinking. And I'm not opposed to positive thinking. In fact, I'm very much a believer in mindset is super important for your life. And it's something that, I will keep harping on that. Mindset is super important for your life. And that is definitely an important thing to this channel. We're not going to ignore that material reality. That's not going to happen here. It's a two-way street. There's a balance that has to happen. And a few people can do well. And yes, a lot of positive thinking, and maybe they won the social media lottery. Maybe they had just the right ingredients to get there. They've leveraged the tools of digital technology to run people through their own system of this, that, or the other thing, how to live, how to make your life better, and so on. But at some level, that isn't working, right? And we know this. it might work here and there. There's a success story here and there, but systemically, as the masses of people, we're not experiencing what we want to experience. And it's because we've grounded a world into place that does not support the life that most of us would rather live. And until we ground that different world into place, most of us will not be living that life. You then have to have this positive mindset, but also keep struggling along, right? If you're online and trying to get something going, there's a intense pressure for you to seem like you got it all put together, like the money's flowing in and everything's great. You all see the ads on YouTube here, on Instagram, Facebook, or wherever else. Somebody's got the next big thing that's going to solve your problems, yada, 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 yada. That's not it. How many of those people are also just right on the edge? They're hoping this works for them. You never see them again. That's what happens. That's the reality. And yes, a few people get an audience and they find they can exist that way. Great. That's not solving the problem for most of us, because we can't all do that. It doesn't make sense. Not everyone can do that. We can't all do the same things and get to the life we want to live. We don't even all want to live the same life. So how can we get to a world where more of us can live the life we want to live? That's the world we need to ground into place. And in the meantime, what is keeping us from that world? Well, there is a different world coming in. There is something different coming in, but what is arrayed against us is what is always arrayed against us here on earth, which is fear and worry. So yes, mindset is crucial. It's crucial. But not in that way of, I got to have this positive mindset and I got to do everything like this other person who seems successful on the internet. Otherwise, I won't be successful. And in 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I'm still struggling, and I don't stick in that because it doesn't actually work. And maybe I've spent $300, $400, $500, and that's made somebody else's life work because they sold that to me, but it hasn't worked for me. Well, see, that's the problem. And that different world that wants to come in, it's going to take something different. It's going to take some patience. Yes, there's a new world that wants to come in, a new earth, as it gets talked about, that wants to come in. It's going to take time, okay? And that's the message that's been coming through a lot lately, and where I knew this message was going to end up. And the reintroduction of this channel is about being patient, about working with the energies that we need to work with in order to bring that earth in. And, what I've received is, over the next, say, 7 years, because that's around the timeline that it takes to bring in a reality that we're then, that the masses are experiencing. See, we think that, if we elect a different president, it's always going to change. Well, it takes about 7 years for that to actually trickle through. So the world in 2024 that we're just now experiencing, guess when that started? Around 2017. Do the math. Think about what leadership we decided to follow in the U.S. around 2016, 2017, and where we are now. The inept leadership we're currently experiencing isn't fully responsible for the crap happening in the world. They're also mismanaging it. And the world that's coming in because of that mismanagement, we're not going to see for a while. It's time for the bulk of people to get our heads in the game and realize that I mean, voting's a thing. That's not what I'm talking about here. Politics is a thing. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not recommending a candidate. I'm not saying don't go vote for that person. What I'm saying is you got to get your head in the game. I got to get my head in the game. What is the actual game? What problems can we come together and solve in different ways? So fear is a big problem, keeping us from that, and worry. And worry comes from lack. And there is actual lack that many of us are in. This is not a fake thing. People talk about a lack mindset. Well, yes, but also people are in actual lack. People are in actual poverty. Until we solve that, until we bring in a world where that can be more easily solved, rather than always being hurdles thrown up against, how dare anyone have health care or enough money to live or a house to live in? How dare that happen without you paying your dues? But we can spend lots of money dropping bombs on other countries. That money can go where it goes. The material reality, things mean that means something. What does it mean? That's spirituality. What does it mean when somebody treats you horribly but then tries to keep you attached to them and you're stuck in that for years and years, as many of us have been with family and friends at times, in romantic relationships and all kinds in work relationships? What does that mean? What does that mean when a whole society does that to basically everyone? Keeps you locked into something you have to do for the money you need. But then it's awful. And you don't want to do it, but you have to. And you spend your whole life that way. What does that mean? That means that's bankrupt. That's impoverished. At a time when, materially, we have the capability to produce everything we need. We have the capability to produce enough for everyone. Worldwide. We do. We have the capability to solve all those problems. But we don't do it. What's keeping us? Yes, power structures. Yes, social structures. Yes, religious and spiritual structures of belief and practice. Lots of different things. Family structures, if we want to get down into the depths of it, right? That we are born into and then we're brought up in, and then we are expecting a certain type of life, and before we know it, we've lived 20, 30, 40 years of that life, and the world that we wanted to live in already isn't here. Somebody has to be the first generation to, with enough mass, move the needle. So yeah, that's what this channel is about. A lot of it's going to be very spiritual then, but very in esoteric practices, thinking about energy. That is the spiritual practice part of it. But also, there's going to be a lot of this too. It's going to continue to be, what can we practically do? How can we put our actions behind a new world that we want to bring in? What ideas can we support? What new social structures can we bring together amongst everyday people that are not dependent on this or that technology, this or that corporation, the government, etc., but that we do for ourselves? So that's a lot. It's what I'm all about. Doesn't really matter what you see here, whether I'm reading poetry, whether I'm doing a druidic reading, whether I'm giving an update on the lunar cycle or the solar energies, or whether I'm talking about some new project, hopefully eventually getting other people on to talk about what they're doing to build awareness, building community. We'll see what happens. It's all about what we can bring down and actually anchor into a grounded reality. Social structures, actual lived experience. That is what builds a different world in 7 years. It starts now. So this has been the news from Not So Far North. Again, there'll be lots of different types of updates and communications. I'm an eclectic person, so it's going to be eclectic. It's going to stay that way. I will keep trying to put different videos in different playlists so that if you're only interested in one aspect of that, you can easily find it by looking through the different playlists on the channel. And yeah, that's pretty much it for now. Be in the light. Be in the light. And I say that not just as a spiritual highfalutin thing, but literally get out in the sunlight. Literally experience the moonlight when the moon isn't basically non-existent as it is right now. That's a time to experience that darkness. What is there? What's living there? Get into these energies. Be in peace. Mindset, right? It is so much about our mindset. It is about enough of us coming together and realizing, not even necessarily formally, but just realizing we can do things differently. We don't have to live in this. And just starting to enact that. That's a mindset difference. Right? So much as warring against that. And what is warring against it? Fear and worry. And that's where love comes in. See, fear and worry divides, separates, makes lonely and lonesome people. Love does the opposite. Love is gravity. Love clumps together things that find themselves clumping together, and structures develop. Whole worlds develop. And that's what we're talking about. That's what I'm going to keep talking about. So, all of that love and peace and as much light as you can stand, sending it your way right now. We're all on the spiral. Are we going up or are we going down on the spiral? Things come around and they seem to pass away and they're on the other side of the spiral, and then suddenly they're back around, or we're back around to it. Have a little patience. Dating myself there. Not music I was allowed to listen to as a kid. Would have made when I did listen to it, I'm sure it made my parents very grumpy. Look it up, young people.